rain tapped steadily against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Charles Whitman's high-rise office, his private sanctuary perched atop the skyline, far removed from the streets where his legacy once thrived. Each drop struck like a weary metronome, echoing the silent weight of the words he had just finished reading. In his trembling hands lay the 7th anonymous letter that month, each one more haunting than the last. But this one cut deeper than he was prepared for. Over the decades, Charles had grown used to reading contracts, profit projections, and polished accolades, but the words in this letter were different, raw, unfiltered, and devastatingly honest. They sliced through him not like a business critique, but like a betrayal of something sacred. "Mr. Whitman, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but your restaurant on 5th Street is no longer a place of dignity. Yesterday, I watched your staff mock an elderly woman with a walker. They rushed her out before she could even finish her soup. The manager laughed about it afterward. This is not what Whitman's Grill used to stand for." Charles closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from the sting of a wound he didn't see coming. He had spent over 43 years building Whitman's Grill from a tiny roadside diner into a beloved chain of 78 restaurants across the country. Every dish, every wall sconce, every warm greeting at the door carried a trace of his soul. His motto was simple, and it had guided him since day one. Every guest is family. More importantly, but now, his family had forgotten how to care. This pain wasn't like the sting of a bad quarterly report or a downturn in sales. No, this was far more intimate. It was the grief of watching something you loved rot from the inside, slowly, quietly, until it no longer resembled what it once was. Retirement had changed him. 10 years away from the daily operations had softened his once commanding frame. His silver hair had thinned, his shoulders slightly curved with age. The tailored suits still hanging in his closet now felt like costumes from a different life. But his heart still beat with the same fire that once had him flipping pancakes and greeting customers by name. And now, that same heart ached as he read letter after letter, voicemail after voicemail, each one painting the same bleak portrait. The original Whitman's Grill, the heart of the entire chain, had become a place of indifference, cruelty, and disregard for the very people it was built to serve. Old folks, disabled patrons, people just looking for kindness with their morning coffee, were now treated like burdens, and this time, Charles couldn't turn a blind eye. With effort, he rose from his chair. His joints protested from the hours he'd spent hunched over those heartbreaking letters, but the weight in his chest was heavier than the stiffness in his bones. He moved toward his bedroom closet, brushing aside the Italian suits and hand-stitched ties, reaching for a version of himself he'd long buried. A faded brown cardigan, worn thin at the elbows. A pair of khakis frayed at the cuffs, scuffed leather shoes weathered by time and the stories they'd walked through. As he dressed, he caught his reflection in the mirror. Gone was the billionaire philanthropist who once graced Forbes and shook hands with senators. In his place stood a tired old man, the very type his own staff might ignore, dismiss, or rush out the door. And for the first time in his life, Charles Whitman understood what it felt like to be invisible. Outside, the sun broke through the passing rain clouds, casting a golden shimmer over 5th Street. Charles walked with slow, determined steps, cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. The familiar red brick facade of the original Whitman's Grill came into view, its golden signage designed by his own hand 4 decades ago still gleamed proudly. But Charles knew he was no longer the man whose name hung above that door. He was a stranger now, a forgotten figure, a ghost returning to the home he once built. His hand trembled as he reached for the heavy wooden door. The feel of it was different. No longer the warm welcome of years past. It now felt like a threshold to something lost. Inside, the rich aroma of bacon and brewed coffee should have felt like coming home, but instead, Charles felt like an intruder. The air was thick with indifference, not comfort. There was no one at the host's stand. But just beyond it, he saw a young blonde woman, perfectly styled, immaculate makeup, laughing loudly on her phone, completely absorbed in her own world. Her name tag caught the light. Madison. Charles tightened his grip on his cane. The soft tapping of it against the tile echoed louder than it should have, a reminder. He was here. He was still standing. "Excuse me," he said gently, voice barely audible over the bustle of the late morning rush. Madison lifted her eyes lazily, scanning him from head to toe like someone assessing a misplaced piece of furniture. Her expression shifted, from mild annoyance to thinly veiled contempt. And then she went back to her phone call. No greeting, no acknowledgement. Charles stood still, and in that moment, he felt the sharp sting of erasure. Around him, sharply dressed business professionals were welcomed with smiles, guided to their tables, and served with clockwork efficiency. Meanwhile, he remained planted, forgotten, unseen, unworthy. "Please," he said again, a bit louder this time, trying to pull from what little pride he still had. "I'd like a table." Madison sighed, long and dramatic, as if he were the one ruining her day. She covered her phone with a perfectly manicured hand, then lazily gestured toward the half-empty dining room. "We're really busy right now," she said, voice devoid of care. "Maybe try the diner down the street. Might be more your speed." Those words struck Charles like a punch to the gut. Not just a rejection, a dismissal of his very worth. This place, this space, had once been his dream made real. It had been his sanctuary, his tribute to community, kindness, and dignity. And now, he stood in it as if he were a nuisance. From the kitchen, another figure emerged, tall, sharp-featured, with slicked-back hair and a permanent scowl that could sour milk. The name tag read Derek. "What's going on out here?" he barked, tone already hostile, already assuming Charles was the problem. I just want a meal," Charles answered quietly, hating how small his voice sounded, how insignificant he suddenly felt in the place that had once been his empire. Derek rolled his eyes in exasperation. "Look, Grandpa, this isn't a soup kitchen. If you don't have the money, then—" His voice was suddenly cut off. "I can sit at table 12. The words were soft, barely louder than a whisper, but they rang out like a bell slicing through the heavy fog of disdain. Charles turned toward the voice, his heart stuttering. A young woman was approaching. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform was neat, though her shoes were worn down at the soles, a silent testimony to the long, thankless shifts she had worked. Her name tag read Emily. But what stopped Charles wasn't her voice, or her posture, or even her kindness. It was her eyes. In them was something he hadn't seen in his restaurant for years. Genuine humanity. Derek's face flushed crimson from being interrupted. "Emily, don't waste your time with someone like—" "Everyone deserves a decent meal," Emily replied, her tone calm but unwavering. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture, but there was a conviction in her words that had clearly been forged through witnessing injustice and choosing compassion anyway. Then she turned to Charles, and her entire expression softened. "Hi there, I'm Emily. Would you like me to help you to a table?" Something inside Charles cracked open, not a breaking, more like a thawing, like the first spring rain after a bitter, endless winter. "That would be very kind," he murmured. Emily stepped beside him and gently took his elbow, guiding him through the maze of tables and distant laughter. Charles noticed how she shortened her stride to match his, how she pulled out chairs and slid obstacles aside without drawing attention to it, as if kindness were second nature, not performance. "Is this spot okay?" she asked, motioning to a small table tucked into a cozy corner. The lighting was soft, the view just right. "It's one of my favorite spots," she said with a quiet smile. "Peaceful, but you can still watch the world go by." Charles sank slowly into the padded booth. Before he could say a word, Emily poured him a cold glass of water, not because she had to, but because she noticed. Her every movement was smooth, practiced, but above all, respectful. "Take your time with the menu," she said, placing it gently in front of him. "There's no rush at all. I'll come check on you in a few minutes, okay?" Charles nodded, afraid that if he spoke, the emotion in his throat might betray him. He watched as she walked away, her steps steady, her presence quiet but magnetic. She stopped at each table, not just to pour coffee, but to genuinely check in. She leaned in when an elderly man spoke softly. She smiled with her eyes. Her kindness wasn't performative. It was real. Charles blinked hard. The menu blurred, not from poor eyesight, but from tears threatening to spill. These were his dishes, his legacy. The pancakes his grandmother taught him to make on Sunday mornings. The pot roast his late wife used to request every birthday. Every dish wasn't just food. It was a memory, a love letter, a story. By the time Emily returned, Charles had composed himself. "I'll have this steel-cut oatmeal, please, and maybe some toast." He braced himself for the sigh, the impatience, the fake smile that always came with an order so simple it seemed unworthy of attention. But Emily simply beamed. "Excellent choice. The oats are hearty, and we top them with fresh berries and a drizzle of local honey. For the toast, would you prefer whole wheat or sourdough?" "Whole wheat would be perfect." "Got it. Oh, and I noticed you looked a little chilly earlier. Would you like me to adjust the thermostat, or maybe a hot cup of tea while you wait?" Charles stared at her, stunned. When was the last time someone asked him if he was cold? When was the last time someone even noticed? "Tea would be wonderful," he whispered. Emily walked away with quiet grace, and Charles looked around the room again, but now with new eyes. Derek was deliberately ignoring an elderly couple, pretending not to see them, raising their hands for service. Madison had just seated a family with small children in the darkest, most inconvenient corner of the restaurant, even though better tables were available. Through the kitchen window, Charles spotted the cooks joking and laughing, glued to their phones as chaos built behind them. But then, there was Emily, helping an old man with a cane ease into his seat, her hands guiding his movements with practiced care. At another table, she was reading the menu aloud to a woman who looked overwhelmed, never showing a hint of frustration. Then the oatmeal arrived. Hot, fragrant, beautiful. The berries were fresh and vibrant, the honey golden and glistening. The toast was cut on the diagonal, crisp and warm, served with butter and jam on the side. Simple food, but made with love, and Charles could taste it. "How is everything?" Emily asked, stopping by his table again. "Perfect," Charles said, and this time he meant it with every fiber of his being. "You're too kind," Emily said, cheeks flushing. "I just believe everyone deserves to feel welcome. Food is supposed to bring people together, right?" Charles nearly choked on a spoonful of oatmeal. This young woman, this server in worn shoes and an honest smile, understood what his entire corporate board had forgotten. The true purpose of hospitality. "You remind me of someone I used to know," Charles said softly. "Someone who believed restaurants were for giving, not just taking." Emily smiled with quiet warmth. "My grandmother used to tell me, when you feed someone, you're nourishing their soul, not just their stomach." And in that moment, as Charles finished his meal, he realized something profound. For the first time in over a decade, he felt whole. As he stood to leave, Madison whispered something to a coworker and pointed toward Emily. They both giggled under their breath, not even trying to hide it. But Charles ignored them. Emily met him at the front again, receipt in hand, her eyes still just as kind. He handed her exact change, and then tucked a crisp $20 bill on top, more than double the cost of his modest meal. Emily's eyes widened. "Sir, this is too much. I can't accept." Charles raised a shaky hand. "No, it's not enough." Their eyes met, and for a moment the noise around them faded. "Thank you," he said simply, "for reminding me that kindness still exists in this world." As Charles turned to leave, Derek's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Emily, you can't keep wasting time on customers who can't even tip properly. Management's already asking questions." Charles froze, hand hovering over the door handle. He turned back. Emily's face had flushed from embarrassment, but her eyes did not waver. "Treating people with dignity is never a waste of time," she said, clear and steady. "It's what makes us human." Charles smiled. A real, honest smile for the first time in months. This young woman wasn't just special. She was the embodiment of what Whitman's Grill was always supposed to be. And in that moment, he made a decision. Not as a wealthy founder planning to swoop in with headlines and PR teams, but as an old man quietly rebuilding hope piece by piece. Emily had shown him the heart of Whitman's Grill wasn't dead, it had just been buried. And hearts could be revived. Cultures could be rebuilt. And sometimes, the most powerful revolutions began with the smallest, most sincere acts of kindness. The next morning, Charles returned. Same cardigan, same worn shoes, a small notebook tucked into his pocket. This time he didn't enter through the front door. He chose the morning rush, when the staff was too busy to notice a quiet old man slipping into a corner booth by the window. He sat alone, observing, listening, writing. The reckoning had begun. Over the next hour, what Charles witnessed chilled him to the bone. Derek, the same server who had humiliated him just days earlier, was now waiting on an elderly couple seated near the window. His demeanor radiated thinly veiled annoyance. Every movement was sharp, impatient. An older woman with silver hair, her voice trembling slightly, asked about the sodium content in the soup. "My doctor says I need to watch my salt intake," she said gently. Derek didn't even try to hide his disdain. He barely glanced at her as he answered, "Lady, it's soup. If you're that worried about your health, maybe stay home." Before she could respond, he spun on his heel and walked away. Charles saw her face crumple, like a fragile door slammed shut. Her husband reached across the table and took her hand quietly, his eyes filled with quiet heartbreak. They left half their meal untouched, slid a generous tip under the edge of the plate, and exited the restaurant in silence. A silent goodbye, filled with more dignity than they had been shown. From his corner table, Charles turned his attention toward the kitchen. Through the service window, he could see Frank, the head chef, a large man with a perpetually lazy gaze, tossing entire plates of untouched food straight into the trash. Hot bacon, perfectly good pancakes, fresh-cut fruit, all discarded without hesitation. Frank laughed with another cook, cracking a joke as he dumped more food. Old people always order too much and never finish. Easier to just toss it all. Charles clenched his jaw. Not just because of the food waste, though it was staggering, hundreds of dollars every morning by his estimate, but because of the callousness, the complete disregard, the lack of soul. It wasn't about the money. It was about what they'd lost. Madison, meanwhile, had become a master of calculated neglect. Well-dressed customers got smiles, prompt seating, and her full attention, but an elderly man with a cane, her entire demeanor changed. Charles watched as the man approached the host stand. "Excuse me, miss, is there a table for one?" Madison didn't even blink. "We're fully booked for the next 2 hours." She lied without hesitation. Charles could count at least 8 empty tables from where he sat. "But I see some open ones right there." "They're all reserved," she cut in coldly. "Maybe try the McDonald's down the street, more your price range." Charles felt his grip tighten around his coffee cup, knuckles going white. The elderly man turned and walked out, shoulders slumped. Not just rejected, but stripped of his dignity. And then, like sunlight cutting through a storm cloud, Emily appeared. Her smile, just as warm as the day before, lit up the space around her. She approached Charles's table with a familiar ease. "Back for our famous oatmeal, sir?" she asked, pouring his water, her movements so gentle they felt like music. Charles smiled faintly. "Actually, I was thinking of trying the pancakes today." Emily lit up. "You'll love them. We make the batter fresh every morning. Would you like blueberries or chocolate chips? Personally, I recommend the turkey sausage on the side. Low fat, but full of flavor." Charles stared at her, amazed. She wasn't just taking an order. She was offering an experience. He made a mental note in his pocket notebook, coded, discreet, but precise. He noted how she bussed tables that weren't hers, cut food for an elderly woman with arthritis, helped a non-English-speaking customer navigate the menu without a flicker of impatience. But he also saw the price she was paying. In a lull between tables, Charles overheard Derek muttering to another server, "Jessica." "Emily makes us look bad," Derek grumbled. "Sits there talking to old geezers for 20 minutes, listening to stories about grandkids and gallbladders. Who cares?" Jessica scoffed. "She's always pushing chairs, adjusting cushions like she's a nurse, not a waitress. If they can't eat in peace, they shouldn't be eating out." "Exactly. And they tip like crap, 10% at most. Total waste of time." Charles gripped his notebook tighter, the pen trembling slightly in his hand. He was furious, but he stayed seated. He needed proof. And he needed a plan. As lunchtime rolled around, the manager finally made his appearance. Trent, a wiry man with permanently furrowed brows and the expression of someone who'd just bitten into a lemon. "I looked at the numbers," he said to the staff. "Service speed is down 15%. We need to pick it up. Less chatting, more table turns. Time is money." His eyes locked onto Emily, just as she was carefully helping an elderly man with food allergies navigate the menu. "Emily," he called, "I need a word." Charles leaned forward, listening. "You're spending too much time on low-revenue customers. They order soup, drink water, stay for 2 hours, and tip $5. We need those tables open for real spenders." Emily didn't argue, but Charles saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes. I think making people feel welcome matters, too." Craig snorted. "Welcome doesn't pay wages. If you don't understand that, maybe this isn't the right job for you. I'm watching you. Improve or move on." Charles saw her shoulders sag just slightly, but she didn't cry. She turned back to her guests, the same smile on her lips. But something in her eyes had changed. This system wasn't built to support people like Emily. It was designed to grind them down. As Charles got up to leave, he heard Derek whispering behind the counter to Madison. "She's not gonna last. Give it a week. She'll either quit or toughen up like the rest of us." Madison snorted. 3 days. She's too soft for this business." Charles paid, leaving a modest tip to avoid suspicion, and walked slowly toward the exit. But before he stepped outside, he turned. Emily was at another table, helping an elderly man with trembling hands steady his cup of coffee. No one else in the restaurant noticed, but Charles did, and he knew right then. The battle for the soul of Whitman's Grill had begun. Emily was fighting it alone, but not for much longer, because Charles had what he needed now. Dates, witnesses, evidence. But more importantly, he had something else. Hope. Hope that kindness wasn't a fantasy. Hope that dignity still mattered. Hope that one person could still change the course of an entire company. And he was ready to act. Craig, the restaurant manager, moved through the dining room like a predator stalking prey, stopwatch in hand, lips pursed in permanent irritation. Every step he took carried the weight of someone measuring worth in seconds and dollars. When he spotted Emily kneeling beside an elderly man, helping him steady his trembling hands to read the menu, his eyes narrowed into slits. "Emily," he barked. The voice cracked like a whip across the dining room, silencing chatter and drawing every pair of eyes toward her. "Table 4's been waiting 5 minutes for their check. Move." Emily's cheeks flushed crimson. She stood quickly, murmuring an apology to the older man, and stepped away. It felt like a scene choreographed to humiliate her. But then, everything cracked. Charles had just finished his meal when his hands betrayed him. Years of arthritis and age stole his grip, and the water glass slipped. It shattered. A sharp, clean crash split the air like a gunshot. Ice and glass scattered across the polished floor. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Charles froze, eyes wide with embarrassment, shoulders folding in on themselves. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "You say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." He felt as if the world had stopped turning just to watch him fail. Before Emily could react, Derek was already there, drawn to the moment like a vulture smelling weakness. "Seriously, old man," Derek sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You can't even hold a water glass? Maybe this is why people like you shouldn't be eating out." Each word landed like a blade. The room held its breath. Forks hung in the air. Eyes darted between Charles and the mess at his feet. "Look at this disaster," Derek spat, gesturing at the water and shards. "Now I have to clean this up. For what? You've been nursing that bowl of oatmeal for 2 hours and left me a $3 tip?" At the next table, an elderly couple began to quietly stand. A man in a business suit looked away, visibly uncomfortable. Charles had never felt smaller. Like a child scolded in front of a classroom. Like a ghost being told he wasn't welcome in the world he once built. And then Emily arrived. She didn't rush in. She walked, calm and collected, like the eye of a storm. She knelt by the broken glass, picking up each piece with slow, deliberate grace. "Accidents happen," she said softly but clearly. "There's nothing to be ashamed of." Derek's jaw tensed. "Don't encourage this, Emily. If he can't control his hands, he should just stay home." Emily stood. She held a shard of glass in one hand, but her gaze, sharp as steel, met his without flinching. "He's a paying customer. He deserves respect, just like everyone else here." "He's a burden, and you know it," Derek snarled. "You're making everyone uncomfortable with these little charity acts of yours." And then Craig appeared, summoned by the rising tension like a judge to a sentencing. His face was flushed with anger, voice stern. "Emily, step away from the table. You're disrupting the restaurant." "I'm cleaning up after a customer," she replied evenly. "Isn't that part of the job?" "You're making a scene," Craig growled. "This is exactly what I warn you about. You're more concerned with these people than you are with our standards." Emily's hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. Her voice didn't shake. "And maybe our standards should include a little compassion." Silence. Even the kitchen staff peeked out, frozen mid-task. This was the moment. Everyone knew it. Emily's fate was about to be sealed. Greg stepped closer, lowering his voice to a snarl that only Charles and Emily could hear. "You're on thin ice, Emily. Is this old man really worth your job?" Charles's heart ached. He looked up at her from the mess on the floor, from the broken glass, from the humiliation. As she looked back at him, at the man the world had tried to forget. Then she reached out. Her hand, soft but steady, grasped his elbow. "Let's go," she said gently. "Let me help you to the door." "Emily," Craig bellowed, "do not walk away from this table." "I'm helping a customer exit the restaurant," she said, turning. "Isn't that customer service, Mr. Craig?" The two of them, an elderly man and a young woman, walked side by side through the restaurant. Charles felt the weight of 100 eyes following them, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel embarrassed. He felt proud that someone had stood for him, that someone believed his dignity was still worth protecting. At the door, Emily turned around. Her voice was calm, but rang out like a declaration. "Apologies for the disruption, but here at Whitman's Grill we believe every customer deserves to feel welcome, to be treated with dignity." The words echoed through the dining room. Right there, in the restaurant Charles once founded with that very philosophy, Emily was now the only one living it. Outside, her hands shook. She helped Charles down the steps, voice cracking. "I'm sorry, I really am. You didn't deserve that, no one does." Charles looked at her, eyes filled with something deeper than thanks. It was recognition. She had chosen kindness, even when it came at the cost of her job. "Thank you," he said, more sincerely than he ever had in his life. "You'll be hearing from me very soon." He turned to leave. And just before the door shut behind him, Craig's voice thundered like a final blow. "Emily, my office, now. Friday morning, 9 a.m. A text message had gone out the night before. "Mandatory meeting. No exceptions. Your career depends on your attendance." Emily arrived 15 minutes early. She hadn't slept. She sat in the back row of the dining room, now rearranged like a courtroom, every chair facing forward. Around her, staff murmured with curiosity and confusion. Derek leaned over with a wicked smile. "Nervous, Emily?" "Don't be. I'm sure they'll give you a real glowing letter of recommendation." From the front row, Madison chimed in. "You'd be great at a retirement home. Maybe go feed pudding to someone's grandma." Emily said nothing. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. 9 a.m. sharp. The doors opened. Craig entered first, followed by 3 sharply dressed strangers carrying folders. Lawyers, maybe executives. But the room fell silent as a black limousine pulled to a stop just outside the front window, and from it stepped the old man in the cardigan. But he was no longer just an old man. His silver hair was neatly combed, his charcoal gray suit was crisp, his posture strong, his eyes sharp. Charles Whitman had returned, no longer invisible, and no longer forgotten. He wasn't here as a customer. He was here as the founder of Whitman's Grill, the final guardian of its soul. The man they once dismissed as a frail old nobody now walked through the restaurant with the commanding air of someone who belonged there. Because the truth was, he did. A wave of disbelief rippled through the room like the world had paused to witness a secret unveiled. Heads turned in unison, expressions shifted, confusion melted into shock, shock twisted into fear. Derek turned pale, like he'd seen a ghost. Madison's mouth hung open, eyes darting, panicked. And Craig, the ever-composed manager, sat frozen, his jaw clenched, face stiff as stone. Even Emily, the one person who shouldn't have been surprised, gripped the edge of her chair, breath caught in her throat. She blinked, half convinced this must be some strange dream. But it was no dream. The man in the fraying cardigan, who'd once trembled over a spilled glass of water, was gone. In his place now stood someone else entirely. Charles Whitman, walking like a general returning to the battlefield, he built with his own 2 hands. He moved slowly, but every step felt anchored by purpose. As he reached the front of the room, his gaze swept the crowd, and when his eyes landed on Emily, her heart nearly stopped. There was no pity there, no gratitude, Only justice. One of the suited men stepped forward, voice clear and professional. Good morning, everyone. I'm Robert Chin, Executive Vice President of Whitman Holdings, and today I have the honor of reintroducing you to the founder and rightful owner of Whitman's Grill, Mr. Charles Whitman. The silence in the room was so absolute you could hear a chair creak from the farthest corner. Charles stepped up. His voice, low and steady, cut through the stillness like a blade. This past week, he began, I dined here not as Charles Whitman, the owner, but as a tired, forgotten old man. All I wanted was a warm meal and a little human decency. The words fell heavy, each one a stone dropped into a still pond, sending waves no one could ignore. Derek shifted in his seat. Madison stared into her lap. Emily blinked rapidly, trying to hold herself together. What I witnessed, Charles continued, was a systematic betrayal of everything this brand was built to stand for. His voice never rose. It didn't have to. I saw elderly guests mocked. I saw disabled customers lied to and turned away. I watched perfectly good food thrown into the trash while the homeless slept outside on the sidewalk. Charles gestured. An assistant stepped forward, placing a laptop on the table and connecting it to a projector. The screen behind him flickered to life. Tuesday morning, Charles said simply. Footage rolled. Derek appeared, berating Mrs. Patterson. If you care about your blood pressure, lady, eat at home. Derek's face turned scarlet. The room shifted uncomfortably. Some staff looked away, ashamed. More footage followed. Madison coldly brushing off a man with a walker. Frank in the kitchen, tossing full plates into the trash. Craig stalking the floor with a stopwatch, treating servers like machines. Then the screen went black. Until Charles spoke again. And this was yesterday. Everyone watched. The entire water glass incident. From the moment Charles was humiliated, to the moment Emily appeared, knelt beside him, and offered her hand. When it ended, the room sat in stunned, weighted silence. Then Charles's voice rose, not louder, but sharper. Some of you may be wondering why I didn't reveal myself sooner. The answer is simple. He paused. Power changes how people behave. Weakness, however, reveals who they truly are. He turned toward Derek. You, Derek, showed cruelty without provocation. You placed your own convenience above basic compassion. His eyes shifted to Madison. You, Madison, chose deception and elitism. You treated customers like burdens if they didn't match your aesthetic. Craig tried to shrink into his seat. And you, Craig, you fostered a culture of fear. You measured human worth in seconds, in dollars, in silence. Then Charles turned. And for the first time since he walked in, his voice softened. His eyes found Emily. But in the midst of all this, I saw something else. A reminder that the soul of Whitman's Grill still exists. It exists in those who choose kindness over convenience, dignity over profit, service over self. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She never knew. She never imagined that her quiet acts of decency, carried out in the shadows of dismissal, would be witnessed by the man who created it all. Charles held up a thick file. In my hands is a detailed report, each infraction, each breach of our core values. Documented, dated, irrevocable. He opened it with solemnity, like a judge delivering verdicts. And the reckoning begins now. He turned the page. Derek Matthews. Over 5 days, I logged 17 separate incidents of customer mistreatment. You mocked an elderly woman with Parkinson's, refused service to a veteran, and you humiliated me for a mistake that anyone could have made. Derek jumped to his feet, blustering. You can't do this. I've worked here for 3 years. You're firing me over some old man? Over what, exactly? Charles cut him off, voice steely. Derek's jaw worked furiously, but no words came. 2 security staff approached. "Hold. It was her," he spat, pointing at Emily. "This is her fault. Her pathetic little charity act." Charles raised a hand. "It wasn't her. Well, it was you. You made those choices. And now you live with the consequences." The doors shut hard behind Derek. The room exhaled. Madison Torres. Repeated refusal of service. Discrimination. Deceit. Madison sobbed. "Please, I have student loans. Rent. You should have remembered those responsibilities before you chose to look down on people who needed kindness." He turned again. "Hank Rodriguez, wasteful practices and toxic behavior in the kitchen. You're done." Then came the dominoes. One by one. 3 servers, 2 line cooks, an assistant manager. Each dismissed without further debate, each name called like a bell tolling for what they had allowed to rot. Finally, Charles looked to the last man. "Craig Williams. You orchestrated this toxic culture. You threatened your staff. You belittled the one person here who actually upheld our values." Craig leapt to his feet, fists clenched. "I boosted quarterly sales by 15%. My system works. It's effective." "Profit without purpose is meaningless," Charles replied. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Turn in your badge. Security will escort you." Craig sputtered, but no one stood to defend him. No one dared. As he was led out, Charles turned to face the rest. Half the room sat empty. The ones who remained stared at him, stunned, some scared, some quietly relieved. And then something changed. Charles exhaled. The lines on his face softened. His eyes, once sharpened by fury, now brimmed with compassion. "To those of you still sitting here today," Charles's voice resonated across the room, firm but hopeful, "this is not the end. It's the beginning." He gave a small nod, and one of his assistants began distributing packets, heavy, bound, and filled with something more than just paper, a new way forward. "Effective immediately, we're launching a program called Serve with Heart," Charles continued. "Each of you will be retrained, not just in skills, but in empathy, dignity, and the true meaning of service." Emily opened the binder in front of her. Her eyes widened. Inside were outlines for emotional intelligence training, partnerships with senior centers and disability advocates, a new hiring policy focused on character over appearance, and perhaps most radically, a new performance metric, not based on table turnover, but on customer dignity. Charles's voice grew more impassioned. "We will partner with elder care foundations, disability alliances, and local food rescue programs so that not a single bite is wasted again." Emily sat frozen, overwhelmed. But the biggest surprise was still to come. Charles lifted his gaze directly at her. Emily Chin. The room fell into silence. Her heart stopped. She had survived the storm. But now her name was being called. "Please come forward." Emily stood on shaky legs, her vision a blur of shock. Every step felt like walking into a dream she didn't dare believe. When she reached the front, she couldn't bring herself to look up. Then, Charles spoke, not as a CEO, but as the man she had once helped walk out of humiliation. "Emily," he said softly, "this week you reminded me why I opened Whitman's Grill 43 years ago. When others saw burden, you saw humanity. When convenience called, you chose compassion. When your job was on the line, you stood for dignity over safety." She lifted her head and saw his eyes, warm, real, filled with profound respect. "Effective immediately," Charles announced. "You are being promoted to executive assistant manager." Gasps filled the room. A 23-year-old server with no formal managerial training, had just become the new heartbeat of the restaurant. "You may be young, and you may lack experience," Charles continued, "but what you possess cannot be taught. Integrity, kindness, and the courage to live your values even when it costs you everything." Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks. "You'll work alongside me to bring this vision to life. Your salary triples, full executive benefits, and more importantly, my full backing." She choked out the words. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Charles smiled, the same gentle smile she once saw from a man she thought was just an old, lonely guest. "You already haven't. You didn't just save my dignity. You saved the soul of this restaurant." 6 months later, Whitman's Grill was no longer the restaurant it used to be. Not because the walls had changed, but because the heart inside had come alive again. Emily stood at the door, watching families come in, smiling with a quiet pride that burned like a steady flame. At table 6 sat Mrs. Patterson and her husband. This time, she was greeted with warmth by David Date, the once timid trainee. "Let me ask the kitchen to make a low-sodium version of your favorite soup," he said. "Your health matters to us." Emily remembered his first training session, how his hands shook. But when she told him, "Our job isn't to serve food, it's to serve care," his eyes lit up. By the window, Mr. Johnson was being gently guided to his table by Maria, their new front desk attendant. "Your usual table, Mr. Johnson?" she asked. "I saved it for you this morning." "You know me too well," he laughed. "How's your daughter doing?" "She made the dean's list," Maria beamed, "thanks to the tuition assistance program here." Emily's heart swelled. In the kitchen, head chef Sarah ran a tight, respectful operation. No waste, no chaos. Every evening, over 200 meals were sent to shelters from what was once thrown away. And the guests? They came back. The elderly, the disabled, veterans, single parents, families from every walk of life. They brought their grandkids, their neighbors, their stories. The restaurant echoed not with orders shouted, but with laughter, connection, and the soft hum of humanity. Then the door opened, and in walked Charles Whitman. But today, he didn't arrive as the boss. He was welcomed like family. "Good morning, Mr. Whitman," Maria greeted. "Your table's ready. Emily said you might stop by." "Thank you, dear. How's nursing school?" "Better every week," she smiled. "The flexible schedule here means I can still chase my dream." Charles passed by tables, stopping to greet old friends and new faces. And then, he found her. "Emily, walk with me." Outside, the autumn air was crisp. Down the street, the senior center was prepping for a community dinner. A food truck from Whitman's Grill pulled up to deliver meals. A web of love, woven from a place once known for apathy. Charles handed Emily a sealed envelope. Inside, legal papers. Her name, printed beside his. Co-owner, 15% stake. "You're not just an employee anymore," Charles said. "You're a partner. You are the keeper of this place's future." Emily broke down. 6 months ago, I almost got fired." 6 months ago, Charles said gently, "you gave this place a second chance." He paused. "And one more thing, the other locations, they've been calling. They want what we've built here. They want to launch Serve with Heart." Emily turned to look back at the restaurant. Through the glass, she saw joy. Multi-generational tables, servers kneeling beside elders, hands held, faces lit with care. Charles nodded. "We're going nationwide. Every Whitman's Grill, rebuilt with compassion, not quotas." She remembered Mrs. Patterson, David, Maria, the children, the food trucks. She remembered the spilled glass, the shame, the hand she reached out. And now, the ripple. "When do we start?" she asked. "We already did," Charles smiled. "The moment you took my hand and walked me out of humiliation." They turned, walking back inside, hand in hand, united in a dream reborn. Was the greatest revolutions don't start with grand speeches. They start with a cup of water offered with respect, with a chair pulled out for someone who thought they were invisible, with an ordinary server who dared to believe that kindness is never out of style,